Hello, we're going to do another coding with AI example. This time we're using PyTest BDD to focus on a financial calculator. And I'm going to orient you just a little bit to how this project starts. This project starts with a number of features that are all defined under the features folder in these feature files. So if I open up compute monthly interest rate feature, it will describe how this feature is to be used. And what this is an example of how we would write a specification in a language that is known as Gherkin. The README describes how the entire financial calculator is supposed to work. It includes sections that describe the problem statement, the features, which are in these feature files, the installation, and other information about how to set up and how you would use this library. Notice how everything from the project structure to the coding style and the tests are all described in this README. What you'll see is that there is no code. What we have, or what we're going to do, is use GitHub Copilot. So I've added a file under the .github folder that is the GitHub Copilot instructions. And in these instructions, we'll give Copilot some hints as to how we want to perform this. This could be a very generic set of Copilot instructions that could be applied across many different libraries, modules, and applications. It describes things like the tools we're going to be using, the code coverage we're expecting, and the testing patterns that we intend to apply, exception handling, and other conventions in code organization and project maintenance. So between the README, the Copilot instructions, and all of these feature files, we've only started from English language. Now, the English language is very domain specific in the financial calculator space, but still it is all about the domain and some of the constructs of the programming language, but not Python code at all. So I will start to engage with Copilot at this point. Now, it's in agent mode, and it's using Claude Sonnet 4. So those are two important settings that I've applied here. I'm going to essentially start to instruct Copilot, and Copilot will get busy as an agent in trying to build this out. So what I would like to do is start by asking Copilot, assume the role of a senior Python developer. Review the README MD file and the .github Copilot -instructions.md. Generate a Python solution that adheres to the conventions and features of this project. So at this point, Copilot in agent mode is going to start absorbing the information that is in this folder. And it will start to build up a strategy around implementing a solution to this. What it finds is that there's no source directory or test directories that exist yet. But based on the requirements, the agent will start to generate what it needs. So as it starts going through the standard Python library, it's going to see what it needs and start creating those files. So if we see on the right, the source directory has already been created, and it's starting to fill that in. It's found some of the files that it thought it might need to create already exist. So one of the things that it wants to add is Pylance, or the GitHub environment. The Visual Studio Code environment has found that. So I'm going to add Pylance to this. It's creating more and more test files. And as it builds up these test files, it's going to want me to be able to look at these test files and see if I can review them. These generally look like good starting points. Copilot has been working, continue to iterate. And it's going to continue to give me a solution to this problem. So it continues to build out my test files. At this point, I need to have an appreciation for the code that it's building into these files. So I will need to review these to understand them. So it keeps working through a number of Visual Studio Code files, and it needs to start building some analysis of the coverage that is mentioned in the README file. So it'll need to analyze the coverage. So before we run, it wants to create a virtual environment, which I want to do. In that virtual environment, we will install the necessary testing libraries that are described. Still working to create that. I needed to select an environment. So now it's going to create run the BDD test to validate. So we'll have it run the tests. Wanted to install the environment first. Now this looks a little bit better. Now some of the tests have failed, so 9 failed. It needs to figure out which 9 failed and why they failed. It's determined that there is a 20% limit on the annual percentage rate. And now all the tests have passed. Now it's going to go through coverage. It's determined that there is not a complete coverage. So it needs to analyze that coverage to understand what code has not been tested. We need to add some tests. So it's now completed the solution, and it summarizes the answers. I want to keep all these files and take a look at them. So let's start with the financial calculator itself. So it provides good overall instruction on how that works and gives complete answer to it and explains the logic. First of all, it checks to make sure that we've got the right types coming in, and it makes sure that the minimum principal, so we can go to that definition. We can see the minimal principal is $1,000. Maximum principal is less than $1 million. And the other capabilities there. We look at the overall calculation. So in order to make sure that we're correct in everything, what I want to do is go back. Let's close the others and say free from the code coverage analysis. So now the agent is going to go through and see if our code coverage is correct. There are some type validation branches that are not being addressed. So generate new feature tests to cover the type validation branches. Now we'll go through and create the pieces that we were missing. And it will create an additional test to handle the type variations. That's where it's passing in a string instead of a number. So if it passes in some invalid values, then those should be covered in our new tests. So as it works through these steps, this will give us new testing. So now we find out that true and false are instances of bool, which is a subclass of int. So that means we need to handle something just a little bit differently. Somebody passes us true or false, that special case needs to be handled as well. Otherwise, it will think it's an integer. We can take a look at these files to see what's actually being recommended. So it's looking for an instance of bool before it passes back a value. So that little piece of difference is helpful to know. So those tests pass, Now all of them pass, and now we want to calculate the coverage, and we're at 100%. So everything has been solved. We're going to analyze the coverage to make sure everything is great and has been retrieved. We went from 89.7% up to 100%. And we're going to keep these files. And let's take a look at one of these files where we're going to handle the type. We have a true in there. We have brackets, all kinds of different things that we check for. So now, having just started with these feature files, we have created a source file in Python. And this goes through and it checks for various validity in our monthly interest rate. So it has to be, if it's a bool or it's not an integer or float, then it will return a value error. We can see other instances where it will return other value errors. Then the heart of the matter is the calculation of the monthly payment. And this is the math in which it produces that calculation. When we look at the tests, we have any of a number of tests that if we create a new terminal and I go ahead and activate what I should find is that I can run my tests and it will give me a run of that. So let's make that a little bit more verbose. And that will tell me all my tests have passed. There we go. This is entirely built out with GitHub Copilot in agent mode using Claude Sonnet 4.